Josh Brown, Black Myth Wukong is the most successful single-player game ever, at least in regards to its Steam numbers, to which it did 2.2 million players immediately, blowing Cyberpunk out the water, blowing Elden Ring out the water, and like I said, being the most well-received game in regards to a single-player title over on Steam. Console numbers are yet to come in, which is one thing that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the way that Black Myth Wukong plays. I've put about 2 or 3 hours into it so far, and the way that the game was review embargoed, only the PC version was accessible to journalists. People had to wait for the console version, so there is a bit of a conversation on just what the hell is the PS5 version, and how does it run, etc. And I want to just talk about the game itself. Like, there's a bit of weird mixed reporting or reputation stuff going in regards to what people thought the game was, as in, is it a Souls game? And then just before launch, it was reported that it was actually a boss rush game, which it's somewhere between the two, let's say. So we can just have a conversation about it. Like I said, I've played a good few hours of it. I've beaten 3 of the main bosses so far, and there's bits and bobs. Do you have any opening questions?
I love that you've got 3 bosses down, only 77 to go.
I was going to say 81 in total or something, apparently, yeah.
No, let me ask you about this, because I was looking forward to it, being a huge fan of Souls-like games myself, but then obviously when the reviews started to drop and people got a closer look at the game, it was reported that it was close to a boss rush,
yes.
Which I guess with that amount of bosses in it is probably correct. I know you do have, certain levels or areas where there are just regular enemies and NPCs to fight, but I guess in terms of its structure, how does it feel to get through these levels? How open is it? Is it very linear? Is it just boss, 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 boss? And more importantly, are those bosses as spectacular as the ones I have seen in the trailers?
So far, yes, in terms of the spectacle, especially at the very beginning. There's a whole tutorial section that is ostensibly set in the clouds. You're fighting various spirits, various deities. That looks very gorgeous. It feels like it's cribbing a little bit from the dragon fight in Sekiro, in terms of just how absolutely gorgeous that thing looks. However, the way the story goes, without doing spoilers, then has you back down on the ground and you're doing different things after that. Level layouts for the opening few levels are very snaky, very path-based. Lots of standard enemies that you can fight there, and then some optional bosses on the outside. They're all main bosses. There's a main pathway to go through. However, it does do the standard Souls thing of the first, at least optional boss, even though they look like they're on the main path, being ludicrously hard. There's a thing called, I think it's called the Wandering Wight. It's like this sort of weird childlike giant who has a pot thing on his head. That is already doing the rounds as one of the hardest bosses. In the Souls genre. It took me like 40 tries or something stupid, because I was fighting it underleveled, and I should have gone away and grinded more and come back, but I refused to, and then I beat it. I also beat, there's a big wolf boss right at the beginning. There's a dude with a flaming bow staff thing as well. All that stuff is really well handled. The one thing I want to point out, actually I'll address the quality stuff first, the performance stuff, because going in, obviously the game looks absolutely stunning, but all the footage that's available is on PC. Black Myth Wukong on PS5 has 3 graphics options. There's a quality mode, a performance mode, and a balanced mode. Balanced, I think you'll get a little bit more out of this if your TV has VRR, like the variable refresh rate stuff. Seems to hang at about 40 to 45 frames a second. That's on the balanced mode. Performance is a locked 60, which is really nice, and doesn't really have that much of a drop off on the quality side of things, the visual side of things. If you have it in the quality mode, then you get more ray tracing, more bells and whistles, but it is on 30. All 3 modes, even the performance one that is largely locked to 60, does hiccup a lot when you're around like a waterfall or some really dense foliage. For the most part, it's okay, but there are a couple of bits, especially in the opening levels, just when you're out exploring, that you'll really feel the frame rate chug. And some of that happens in certain boss attacks and stuff as well. That Wandering White guy that I mentioned fighting, he has a lot of area of effect attacks. He's kicking up a lot of the ground, a lot of debris, a lot of dust particles, a lot of parts of the environment being affected. And for the most part, looks gorgeous, but if you're in the fray, it can chug. Which is my overall thing I want to point out here, is that I think they might patch this, but Stellar Blade had a similar issue with animation priority versus responsiveness. And for Stellar Blade, the developers Shift Up, they got out there and said, look, we love our animations. We're actually, we're not necessarily going to prioritize you hitting the button to cancel out of them, because we put so much work into the animations. And that comes across in Black Myth Wukong as well, which is to say that you have standard attacks on square, and you have a charge attack on triangle, or a heavy attack. However, when you hit triangle, it does a weird thing where the dude kind of goes into the charge stance, even if you're just tapping the button, kind of like flashes the charge stance, then comes out of it if you're running, and then does the move anyway.
Right.
And it's really weird. And I kind of feel like that's something that needs to be patched or something. It's a really weird, unresponsive feel that the game just hits you with at the very beginning. And I think that might be why it's starting to get a bit of a reputation for being buggy. It's just something where you kind of muscle memory need to get used to just holding that button rather than tapping it. But it's a weird feel. There's a weird animation priority feel here that was kind of in Stellar Blade, and those who have played those games will know what I mean. Stellar Blade kind of felt like it wanted to play itself sometimes.
Yeah.
You're dialing in various combos and then watching them play out to a degree. And Black Myth has a little bit of that. I've talked a lot there.
No, I want to ask some questions because you mentioned the fidelity, the technical performance, and a little bit about the combat there. But when it comes to that combat, again, I've heard kind of a lot of different things. Some say that it's closer to a Souls-like, or more of a Team Ninja-like, actually, in terms of the speed of the combat, but still keeping that challenge that you would associate with that subgenre. While others have said it's closer to something like DMC. So in terms of the actual one-on-one fights or 1v however many fights with the other NPCs, like what are you mostly doing? Is it a lot of dodging? Is it parry focused? Because we played something like Rise of the Ronin earlier this year, which is incredibly parry focused, and it seems like parries are in right now. Parrying feels good if you don't know, but is this just kind of more what's it going for in terms of that combat loop?
Honestly, it's way. I don't get the Devil May Cry comparisons. The camera's way too tight. It is too Souls-like. You are encouraged to lock on. You are encouraged to dance around a certain enemy. Even when you're facing off against multiple enemies, you're juggling the lock on. It has an option in the main menu to turn off the auto retargeting thing, which nearly all Souls games have now. To go to the next main enemy that you want to fight. Honestly, it's a lot more like Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor, like the last couple of games there, where you can see the Souls influence, but the general pace of combat is faster than something like a FromSoft game. You do have multiple stances here that you unlock as you go. It doesn't have, thankfully, at least to me, the punishing side of a Souls game where you're losing all your experience when you die. Everything carries over. You can grind on enemies. They do respawn when you save, so you can sort of grind them out, get some levels, unlock more moves. A lot of the specials are level locked in themselves, so if you want to literally say, I'm going to grind to level 10 to get some better health or better moves, you can do that. And you also have access to, at least at the beginning, a couple of different powers. You unlock the ability to transform into different beasts, and then that comes with they come with their own power sets and unlockable moves as well. And you also have an ability to freeze an enemy in place, and then you can level up to do more damage when they're frozen, things like that. Combining that all together and going on the full-out offense is how I beat that stupid Wandering White thing. And you are kind of encouraged to press the offensive. The main dude you play as, and I forget his name, it's something like the Ordained One, or something like that. It's kind of Soulsian style, or like Pentiment style. That guy, the voice acting, I have mine set in Chinese, but the general performance, the script and everything is very... F all of you, I'm going to rip you all in half.
Right.
Like, it's the dude's just menacingly walking towards people, just being like, whatever, man, I don't care, I'll take you on. And there's quite a lot of that personality in there, which is fun. Like, I think that lends a good agency to the dude you're playing as. Like, you can absolutely tool on people. And when you mentioned the parry stuff, it's you hold L2, which is another thing that's kind of like Fallen Order. You just sit and like spin your staff, and you can reflect projectiles back. You can just do what is ostensibly like a 50-hit combo in a second, where you're just peppering a guy because you're spinning the staff all the way around them.
Oh, it sounds enticing.
It's sweet, man. Like when it clicks together and you kind of match up like the really, really fast fighting style, you're dodging and weaving. Also, a perfectly timed dodge leaves a ghost version of your dude on the ground, which means that all the enemies then attack that for a second, so you can spin behind them. There's a lot more here that is encouraging a very escapist power fantasy feel, whereas obviously FromSoft and a lot of the contemporaries like to punch you into a fine paste and you'll make progress slowly. Black Myth, for the most part, is here are some cool powers, here's some great animation, and gorgeous visuals, and just have fun with this over-the-top story of gods fighting.
It sounds like a really good package, Scott. You've sold me on it there. I guess the only thing I would be maybe stressed about in terms of the game itself is the performance side of things. You said it's starting to chug. Do you think there was a reason that they didn't really show off any of the console footage beforehand?
Seems like it.
It doesn't seem like it's a Cyberpunk situation, though.
No.
That thing launched and it was all PC footage, and then we got our hands on the PS4 version, and there was a reason they did not show it, because it did not run. It just didn't run. I was going to say it had all of these issues. It just had the most issues. It did not work whatsoever, but this just seems like a slightly inferior version of the PC edition. But is it is it, I don't know, is it like Dark Souls 1 level when you got to Blight Town and it was virtually unplayable?
No, I think as long as you don't stand under the waterfalls too long and get the hell out of the way of the big enemies and stuff, then you don't necessarily notice it as much.
Cool.
Obviously, different people are going to pick different styles. I tried it unbalanced for a while because I wanted to try and drink in as much of the graphical side of it as possible. But I do want responsiveness in, melee-focused fighters. Ended up putting it back on the performance mode. And the game still looks absolutely gorgeous. I think overall, it's a great version of the game. It is a shame that the one that's been out there for the last few days is the PC version, and it's just going to take people scrabbling to find out, is it actually good on console, which just sucks. Like, obviously the game's been talked about for about 5 years. It's a good long while. It predates the pandemic and everything in terms of when it was first shown off, and there are a lot of really cool visual flourishes here. It's on Unreal 5. Like, it's an absolutely stunning looking game, and hopefully it'll only get patched going forward in regards to polishing certain things out. I do notice, like I said, that charge move weird hang thing. I wonder about how intentional that is, because a lot of the triangle charge moves, like in different stances, like it's almost like that button is a dedicated charge, but it just doesn't. It's really hard to explain without you playing it. But you're sort of like hitting the button, and literally 2 seconds later, your guy, after running a little bit, is going like, "Oh, now I'll do the thing."
Right.
And it just feels really weird. Especially at the beginning when you're trying to get used to everything. But everything that's in there and the progress systems that they're teasing and everything, it seems like a really good, meaty, Soul-style game that is in that more modern space of the Fallen Orders, or like, anything that sort of has a faster combat style to it. A little bit like Devil May Cry, but personally, I'm not seeing that. I think the camera needs to be a bit more pulled out for that to come across.
Man, what's so fascinating to me about this game, unless you got anything else to say about like the actual gameplay and mechanics, is just all of that resulting in... Oh, go on.
Well, just you mentioned probably 10 years ago when we started the video about bosses. They're touting 81 bosses, and you mentioned the idea of where are they in the levels and stuff. That wandering white guy, I mentioned him because it seemed like he was on the main path. Well, he is on the main path, but you can run past the guy, which I just refuse to do, like an idiot. But you are getting bosses quite consistently. I just think it's worthwhile saying, because we were wondering this when the game launched, that idea of a boss rush game, is it like Cuphead? Does it, is it that thing where the focus is so much on the bosses? I don't think so. I think that the level design, the level environments and everything look absolutely gorgeous and are worth exploring. There is loot that you're getting. It's meaningful. You're getting different abilities with the loot. You are encouraged to explore, and I did enjoy grinding through a bunch of enemies and then fighting, knowing that I wasn't losing my time kind of thing, or wasting my time in a standard Souls thing. Like, if I died, I wasn't losing everything. I could just keep grinding, get stronger, and then finally beat it.
Are the levels sort of one continuous path, or is it more discrete, kind of like how Neo 1 and 2 were, where you were booting into discrete levels and environments and then exiting them when you beat like the final boss? Or is this kind of, at least so far continue?
It's kind of in one thing, although it is separated by cutscenes, but they're well done, like when you die to load screen kind of thing. But it's a bit of a mix. For the most part, it's quite a nice, smooth overall progression. I think it'd be one of those things where, as more people play it and more conversations happen about the level design, probably more stuff from the dev side as well, they'll talk about the scope that it started with. I swear, and I can't find the goddamn article anymore, that it started as a one-person dev team. I swear that was a thing.
I've been trying to convince you for days now that this was something you have fabricated.
I've not! I swear, when Black Myth Wukong was first shown off, when we all saw that snow demo, when it was like the dude was fighting a boss and they threw like an air wave and it scattered the snow, and I remember at the time being like, oh my god, it's made by one guy.
You've dreamt it.
I don't think I have.
I think you have.
I am the Black Myth Wukong. I just feel like that was a thing back in like 2016. Maybe COVID brain implanted it to me in the off time. But I think the more discussions that happen around the game will probably start pointing out where different loads are hid and different artistic approaches to using cutscenes to mask transitions between levels and stuff. But for the most part, it's very smooth. There's some loading screens in there, but I think there's enough to drink in regards to a progression. Yeah.
Well, Scott, at the very start of this video, you mentioned that this is the most successful in terms of active plays right now, single-player game of all time, at least on Steam. It's overtaken the likes of Cyberpunk. It's overtaken the likes of Witcher and your Red Dead Redemptions and all of those big hitters. And that is the most fascinating thing to me, because this is ostensibly like the first big crossover AAA game from China that has, appealed to that huge audience, which we have seen, become so dominant in the movie space, and that's why I'm fascinated with it, because I mean, did my bread and butter on analyzing the box office of movies across the 2010s, and it was always crazy to me just how big the box office was in China, not just for their own domestic movies, but for American movies and international movies that would court that audience and reap insane rewards.
Unless you're Matt Damon's The Great Wall.
Yeah, well, yeah. Some did it way too blatantly and way too panderingly, and it did not work, but, you know, Marvel movies really excelled for the longest period of time by getting that Chinese audience in. And I find this fascinating because that hasn't been a market that's necessarily been tapped in the AAA sense, either domestically or internationally. But why I find it so fascinating is that unlike Chinese movies, for instance, that do insane numbers at the domestic box office but don't cross over, I feel like games have a lesser barrier to that crossover appeal, as we're seeing not only with this game, but, you know, games from Asia previously, you know, games from Japan. You mentioned Stellar Blade, the huge success of that earlier this year from South Korea. And, like, we've seen this established before, so to get a huge market like this kind of make its stamp and become so popular in huge part thanks to its domestic audience, I feel like that's what I'm fascinated in, because this is going to have sort of ripple effects on the entire industry kind of going forward. And that is... It's kind of unprecedented in this space, and if you look at, like I said, the history of China's influence on the movie world, there is, for better or worse, a lot of money to be made.
That's definitely the overall thing, is that it has been a weird road for the last few years, seeing various Western companies try to tap into the various wallets of the Chinese populace, and you've seen back and forward versions of what's worked and what hasn't. Something like Activision Blizzard, there was that whole thing with them appeasing various different regulations over in China. I think the overall takeaway for me is a mass positive in regards to it's China's first AAA game. I just love seeing that. Like, the cultural representation that's here is awesome. Obviously, it's based on Journey to the West. Like, there's a lot to pull from in regards to the art design, like the costumes and everything else like that. It's a really cool depiction of a fictionalized, mythical version of China. And I like seeing that stuff, which is obviously separate from the various things that have happened over the years, which, like what you said, different studios curtailing to different government mandates and things that do affect representation and diversity and things like that, and removing characters from certain movies, stuff like that, to try and appease the supposed wider audience. I still think that overall it's a cultural win, and I like seeing something like this. And like you said, Shift Up, the developers of Stellar Blade, are a South Korean team, and Capcom right now are on the time of their lives. Obviously, they're Japanese, alongside the Western AAA stuff that we see, like Suicide Squad or God of War or whatever the hell you want to put in there. Having a global AAA space is awesome. Like, that's my overall takeaway, is that I think when we're talking about the medium of gaming maybe being a bit more acceptable or whatever, the gameplay is what matters. And I think people will check something out if it plays well and it's made well, and that seems to be coming through here. So a lot of people checking out Black Myth Wukong. Its overall player numbers are 2.2 million. There's another story doing the rounds that it lost 2 million players immediately, and it's like, because China went to bed, people went to sleep, so a lot of people stopped playing the game, but that still means there's 200,000 people playing it across the rest of the world, and we'll see what happens to the game overall. But like you said, there is that overall attempt by various studios and companies to explore the Chinese audience, the burgeoning middle class kind of thing, and going from there.
It, like you said, you know, you mentioned Shift Up. That was that team's first console game. This is this team's first console game. I feel like you're seeing a lot of those studios that might have been around for a while start to dabble into console titles to kind of great success.
Well, Sony has the China Hero project as well, so there's a whole, I mean, and also, you know, there's Assassin's Creed Jade, which is going to be the first Assassin's Creed game set in China. Like I said, the Sony project is greenlighting, I think it's like 6 or 7 different projects, different games made by Chinese dev teams. So there's going to be a lot more conversation on that idea of what does a AAA project, an upper echelon project from a different country altogether look like, and, you know, the different pros and cons kind of thing of that. But overall, an extremely confident foot forward, and so far, Black Myth Wukong, besides being absolutely gorgeous, is damn fun to play as well.